How's it going, folks? Welcome to my channel. My name is Brad, the DC Universe Geek, and for today we're going to be talking about action figure articulation. Love it or hate it, the way of the future is highly articulated action figures, and that's going to be the topic for today. So ever since the latest release of the DC Comics multiverse action figures, the Clayface wave, the topic of action figure articulation has sparked up again, and it's always a hot topic amongst collectors. But it seems to have ignited again by people who were hoping for something different from the DC Multiverse figures and feel let down by what they were given. Let's go into it. But first, let's talk about what I perceive a lot of people feel the gold standard is for basic action figure articulation. So a number of years ago, Marvel Legends first hit the scene, and they were massively articulated. They had all the typical articulation that we see now, right? So they had the shoulder articulation, they had the bicep swivel, they had articulated heads on a ball joint. However, they had a lot more articulation. Not only was it a ball joint, but there was a hinge. The elbows were double hinged, the knees were double hinged. And you also had the ankle pivot, and you had toe articulation, hand articulation, you had articulation here in the shoulders. These early Marvel Legends figures were crazy articulated. With that, you also got a little bit of an ugly figure from time to time, because the articulation points at the groin being these two round balls, and the articulations at the shoulders also being these two round balls, they kind of stuck out, and they looked a little bit ugly. Ghost Rider, Silver Surfer, Captain America. And you people that collect Marvel Legends, I've heard you on the forums talking about how the new ones look better than the old ones, so don't think I'm picking on Marvel Legends, I'm just calling a spade a spade. Some of that articulation made the figure look weird and jangly. There's no way around it. It did. For me, that was one of the points that made me not want to buy early Marvel Legends figures, because I'm someone that doesn't do a lot of dynamic posing. They're going to stand on a shelf. And they were just too ugly for me to stand on a shelf for the most part. They still looked like kids' toys to me, and I'm an adult collector. Which is funny, because as an adult collector, I've now transcended into collecting kids' toys, too. Nickelodeon Ninja Turtles. Now, I think I also want to introduce two terms into this video that I'm going to be using, and that is poser and shelfer. I didn't come up with the term poser, actually. There was a fellow in my comment section who was like, hey, don't be hating on the posers. He was just taking a fun jab at me, but I thought that it was a clever term, and then I came up with the idea of shelfers afterwards, because there really is two camps. People that do almost no dynamic posing whatsoever. They just stand them on a shelf and go, oh look, they're there and they look wonderful. And then there's people that are like, I crack these things out all the time and do action figure photography, and even when I do just have them on a shelf, they're in some kind of crazy dynamic pose on the shelf. Posers and shelfers. Now, I do crack my action figures out from time to time for Instagram. A lot of the pictures that I take just end up being group shots. I'm still not doing anything crazy with them. They're just simple group shots. Don't need a lot of articulation for that. However, some people take crazy pictures with their action figures, and they need all that articulation. Now, we live in an age where articulation is king for the adult collector. We have Mezco, we have Mafex, we have Figuarts, we have Marvel Legends. A lot of these action figure companies have twigged on. We want articulation. The question is not about wanting articulation. The question is, how much articulation are we looking for? Now, a smart toy company would hit the forums and listen to what the people are saying and then do that. As a side note, I also want to point out that there is a point where there can be too much action figure articulation. For example, I was never a fan of the Marvel Legends ability to go in and out with the shoulders on that hinge, and I've never used Marvel Legends toes or finger articulation. I find they're the first ones to get wiggly and wibbly after the groin goes and the knees go. I just never really found a use for them, personally. But that's because I'm a shelfer. And you can see behind me the extent of how I pose my figures. They're not dynamically posed. They're like statues that I crack out to take pictures of occasionally. But there's no doubt about it. The adult collecting market is dominated by figures that are highly detailed, super high quality, with a whole butt ton of articulation. It's like an action figure renaissance for us collectors. I don't think we've ever had it so good. Yes, I've just decided. We've never had it so good. We've came a long way from what we had back in the day. For those of you who don't know, who just started collecting, say, around 2005 and onward, we grew up with the neck, the shoulders, and the groin for the most part, and that was it for articulation. There were other brands, you got Cops and Crooks, you got Visionaries, you got G.I. Joe, and they had a lot of articulation, but in general, action figures didn't have a whole lot of articulation because they were marketed to children, of which we are not anymore. We've grown up, and so we demand a different, better product than what we got as children. Anyone that doubts that, well, I say look at the He-Man Masters of the Universe Classics and compare that to the original He-Man. They have all the same look and feel of the original He-Man figures, only they're better articulated. Now, current Marvel Legends figures actually have less articulation than the old ones. They've gotten rid of the fingers and the toes, but they still have double jointed knees and elbows. They've also got the typical shoulder articulation of a Marvel Legends figure, and they still have the ankle rocker, and they still have the head on a ball joint and a hinge. And those tend to be points of articulation that everyone can agree is very useful. Now, if we look at the DC figures released by DC Collectibles in their Icons line, that's an excellent attempt at action figure articulation. They did almost everything right. There's not a ton of articulation in the head. Superman still can't look up when he's flying, but they got double jointed knees, they got double jointed elbows, they have a lot of articulation on the torso, they don't swivel at the waist. I can live without that. They do have ankle pivots though, so there's that. And of course they have articulation at the wrists, and they have the biceps and the shoulders, which are all typically industry standard now for modern adult-oriented action figures. But then we look at another DC property owned by Mattel, the Multiverse line, and a lot of people were let down by what Mattel released to the fans in the Multiverse line. Why? Well, let's talk about that now. The upper body of a Multiverse figure is very much like a DC Universe Classics figure, in that it has an ab crunch, the shoulders are the same, there's a bicep swivel. There's a slight difference in the fact that they've changed how they do the elbow articulation, in that they hide the elbow peg, which I'm a fan of. However, I would have liked to see Multiverse have some sort of, if it's not going to be double jointed, which I would rather, then I would rather see some kind of a peg, so you have the regular hinge articulation, but it can also spin all the way around. I would trade a double jointed elbow for a peg hinge elbow. Even that's cool. And the figures can't look up. For a lot of people that's a big deal. It's not a deal breaker for me, however it would have been nice if Superman, while he was flying, could actually look up. Of which he can't. Mattel just thinks he wants to bump into stuff all day long, like planes, birds. I know he's got super hearing, you would hear it all, I'm just saying. Now where it gets interesting, and where adult collector DC fans feel a little bit burned, is the fact that they had a chance to do it right, to get all the articulation points that fans have been asking for literally for years, and they did some of it, and then they left out a crucial point. So let's start with what they did do. The groin on a modern DC Multiverse figure is actually in some ways better than a DC Universe Classics. I do prefer the look of a DC Universe Classics groin, how it's like it's a hinge swivel and it's really hidden well in the figure. I don't mind the lines and stuff like that. The overall aesthetic of the figure is kept with the DC Universe Classics. However, the DC Multiverse managed to keep most of the aesthetic, but also give us maximum movement in the way of ball-jointed legs. And I think it works out really well. They also listened to what the people wanted, and they gave us double-jointed knees. And that's definitely a step in the right direction. The swivel for the legs is actually up higher towards the groin, like a modern Marvel Legends, and not down just below the knee, like a DC Universe Classics figure. I'm cool with that too, because it looks more natural when you do spin the legs. However, things are afoot here, and I mean that definitely as a pun, that they did not give fans the ankle rockers, the ankle pivots that they so desired and asked Mattel for. I remember the Matty Collector forum. That was something that came up all the time on Matty Collector. Hey, fix the articulation, give us better articulation. And yes, double jointed elbows. Yes, double jointed knees were asked for. However, so was a Marvel Legends style neck hinge, and so was ankle rockers or ankle pivots. And it seems that those two things Mattel has just said, nah, we're not going to give them to you. I don't know why. They just haven't given it to us yet. I am aware that the Multiverse Signature Series has a lot more articulation. I have yet to get my hands on any, but I do believe it has more articulation. I'll be able to confirm that once I have the figures in hand. I just don't want to go by pictures, that's all. So you can see here why a lot of adult collectors who were really excited about the Multiverse line are actually feeling a little bit let down by Mattel, because Mattel had the chance to give us ankle rockers, to put in the pivots, and they just didn't for some reason. Big fans of articulation naturally feel burned right now. However, I don't think that that's a good enough reason to just boycott a line entirely because they didn't give us ankle pivots, unless the only thing you do with your figures is dynamic poses and action figure photography. So what would I do differently if I had unlimited action figure godlike powers to influence the articulation of every single action figure line from now till the end of time? Here's what I would do. Moving forward, every single action figure would have double jointed knees and elbows. They would have the neck on a ball joint and on a hinge. You'd have a snap in place ab crunch as well as a hinge swivel. You'd have the typical shoulders and bicep and wrist of most of the Marvel Legends and DC Multiverse / DC Universe Classics. You'd also have the groin of the modern Marvel Legends / DC Multiverse figures, and every single action figure would have ankle pivots, because you can do those in such a way that they look good, they're hidden, but the people that want to use them all the time, they're there for them. Some figures would have articulation above the gloves and above the boots if it was fitting and it made sense, but that wouldn't be for everybody. All female action figures moving forward would have articulation under the breasts rather than halfway down the figure. I think that just looks ugly. And I would do away with an ab crunch for female action figures altogether, because their bodies tend to be smaller and it just looks out of place, in my opinion. I feel like that would be enough of a compromise for the people who want lots of articulation and for the people who just don't really care. People who will still gladly pose a DC Direct figure on their shelf that has like 5 or 7 points of articulation. However, I'm just one guy who collects action figures and happens to have some ideas. I'm sure you've got your ideas too, so don't be afraid to leave them down in the comments section below. However, I would ask that you be nice to each other and me. Any kind of comments in the comment section that are, this action figure company is crap, or that one's crap, or I don't like these, any kind of negativity like that, I'm just going to delete the comment right away as soon as I see it. Also, if you like this video, slap a like on it for me, because that's going to let me know that you liked it and I'm doing something hopefully right. And if you want to see more of my sort of content show up in your inbox, just hit the red subscribe button. Remember to ding the bell so that you never miss a video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a super day.